A single lamp, a record player, needle already lowered. That falsetto rises out of the dark, aching, weightless. The voice that convinced a generation to fall in love on command. His name is Eddie Kendricks.
A tooth for a tooth, vote for me, and I'll set you free.
And for over a decade, the man who owned his contract decided what that voice was allowed to sing, who it was allowed to leave, and exactly what it would cost him every time he said no.
I say to myself, you're...
Subscribe now, because this isn't just the story of one song he hated. It's the story of every single time Berry Gordy showed him what obedience was actually worth, right up to the final invoice, paid on his deathbed. The countdown begins now. Number 10. Eddie Kendricks. Get ready. Detroit, 1966. Inside Hitsville's Studio A wager gets made that Eddie Kendricks doesn't even know he's part of. Berry Gordy tells a young producer named Norman Whitfield that if the group's next single, Get Ready, Kendricks on lead, built in the tender Smokey Robinson mold his voice was made for, fails to crack the top 20, Whitfield gets to take over the group's direction entirely. Get Ready misses. Whitfield's very next single, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, outperforms it easily. And with one chart result, the sound Eddie Kendricks had spent 5 years building his falsetto around quietly stops belonging to him. He doesn't say much publicly at the time, but years later, in one of the only interviews where he lets his guard all the way down, Kendricks admits he'd actually considered leaving the Temptations as early as 1965, a full year before this wager, at the exact moment the group was finally breaking through nationally. He says he was surrounded by people who didn't have their best interests at heart, that he didn't agree with a lot of the decisions being made around him, that his relationship with the label's founder was never warm to begin with. He stayed anyway. He was worried that walking away that early would cost him the one thing Motown had that nobody else could offer, the machine itself, and everything it could do for a voice like his. That's the trade Eddie Kendricks made in 1965, a full 13 years before it finally came due. Stay inside the machine and let the machine decide. The moment that set the Temptations' entire sound on a new course, the moment that eventually pushed Eddie Kendricks toward the exit, wasn't an artistic decision at all. It was a side bet between two men who never had to answer to a single temptation for how it turned out. The man on the losing end of that bet was the one whose voice the whole group had been built around in the first place, and he'd know it every time he opened his mouth for the next 4 years. Number 9. The Temptations. Cloud 9. By 1968, the sound Eddie Kendricks helped build is unrecognizable. Norman Whitfield is pulling the group into something harder, stranger. Wah-wah guitars, orchestral horns, lyrics about ghettos and confusion, and getting high to survive the week. Cloud 9 wins the group its first Grammy. Psychedelic Shack and Ball of Confusion follow. On paper, it's a creative triumph. From where Eddie Kendricks is standing, it's the sound of his own instrument being slowly written out of the arrangement. He'll say it plainly, decades later, describing the fan reaction to the new direction as nothing short of screaming bloody murder. Longtime listeners who wanted the romantic ballads back, the ones his falsetto was built to carry. Kendricks agreed with them completely. He kept pushing internally for the group to return to that softer sound. Nobody with the power to change course was listening. because the new records were hits, and hits were the only argument that ever won inside Berry Gordy's building. Meanwhile, Dennis Edwards is stepping up as the era's dominant lead voice, and doing it brilliantly. That part deserves to be said honestly. But watch what it does to Kendricks. For 7 straight years, his tenor had been the Temptations' defining signature. Now the whole production style has shifted toward a sound his voice doesn't naturally live inside. Nobody demotes him in a meeting. Nobody tells him anything directly. The spotlight just quietly drifts somewhere else, and he's left standing in the room, technically still a temptation, increasingly a stranger inside his own group's biggest creative wins.
It's a world of love and harmony.
Eddie Kendricks spent 4 years watching his own instrument become a footnote inside the sound he'd helped invent. And the machine that did it to him never had to explain itself, because the machine was winning. He didn't get quiet about it. He got strategic. And the first real casualty of that strategy is about to walk out the door right in front of him. Number 8, David Ruffin, My Girl. Picture 2 limousines pulling away from the same gig. One plain, one lined with mink. Only one member of the 5-man group riding inside it. That's David Ruffin by 1967, lead voice on My Girl, demanding the kind of star treatment Motown is starting to hand Diana Ross, and getting frostier with his own bandmates every week he doesn't get it. But underneath the ego, Ruffin is asking a harder question than, why isn't my name on the marquee? He's asking where the group's money is actually going, and he pushes for an independent audit of the Temptations' earnings. Motown, remarkably, half agrees. The group is allowed to hire an outside accounting firm. What almost nobody outside the label knows is that the firm never gets full access to the books, which are held by a management company that is itself a Motown subsidiary. The audit Ruffin fought for gets permitted to exist and quietly prevented from ever seeing anything real. By 1968, the group has had enough of him regardless, and Ruffin is fired, replaced by Dennis Edwards. Eddie Kendricks, his friend, his ally in nearly every internal fight of the last 5 years, watches it happen up close, furious, and takes something specific away from it. Ask about the money, and the machine finds a way to make the question disappear along with you. The man history remembers as difficult and entitled was also the man who asked Motown to open its books, and the label's answer wasn't to open them. It was to build an audit with no real access, then fire the man who'd asked for it. Eddie Kendricks filed that lesson away and kept singing. 2 years later, at a nightclub in New York, it would be his turn to walk.
A 2 for 2, vote for me, and I'll set you free.
Number 7, Eddie Kendricks, Ball of Confusion. November 1970. The Temptations are mid-run at the Copa in New York, and the tension that's been building for years, the resentment over Whitfield's sound, the unanswered money questions, the ghost of David Ruffin, still hanging over every rehearsal, finally finds its moment. Otis Williams' mother has just died. On stage one night, his voice cracks with grief. After the show, Otis and Melvin Franklin leave immediately, exhausted, wanting no more confrontation. Kendricks is already at the end of his own rope. He leaves too. He simply doesn't come back for the next set. It gets written into history as mutually decided, a phrase that does a lot of quiet work, smoothing over what actually happened. What really happened was 5 years of accumulated hurt finally finding its exit. A man who'd stayed since 1965 out of fear of losing the machine's protection, who'd watched his sound get overruled by a chart bet, who'd stood by while his closest ally in the group got fired for asking honest questions, walked out of a nightclub in the middle of a set and didn't turn around. By the time Eddie Kendricks left the Temptations, he wasn't leaving in anger. He was leaving in exhaustion, the specific, hollowed-out kind that comes after years of being told no. Watching the people who told you no get proven right by the charts every single time. 5 months later, something happens that makes the timing of his exit almost unbearable to sit with.
My window, I watch her as she passes.
Number 6. Eddie Kendricks. Just My Imagination. Running Away With Me.
It's truly a dream come true.
Before the Copa fallout is even fully resolved, before his solo deal is signed, Eddie Kendricks goes back into the studio one last time as a Temptation and records the lead vocal on Just My Imagination, Running Away With Me, the tender, string-drenched ballad he'd been begging the group to make for years. He stays in the booth for hours after the other 4 members go home, chasing the take. It becomes, by his own bandmate Otis Williams' later account, Eddie's finest moment on record. On April 3, 1971, Just My Imagination hits number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. By that date, Eddie Kendricks is already gone, already signed to Motown's Tamla division as a solo act, already building his first album somewhere else entirely. His voice sits at the very top of the pop charts while he's nowhere near the group that put it there.
Tell you it was just my imagination.
Motown's response tells you everything about how the label felt about artists who leave. Not long after, the Temptations release Superstar, Remember How You Got Where You Are, a song later described by music historians as one of the earliest ancestors of the diss track, aimed by name in everything but name at David Ruffin and Eddie Kendricks. A public reminder, set to a number 1 adjacent hit, of exactly who built their careers and who could still take credit for it.
Running away with me.
The best vocal performance of Eddie Kendricks' entire Temptations career hit the top of the charts only after he'd already walked away from the group that recorded it. And Motown's answer to that irony wasn't reflection. It was a public record designed to embarrass him while he struggled through the leanest years of his solo career. He kept working anyway, and what he built next was so far ahead of the industry that almost nobody at his own label noticed. Number 5. Eddie Kendricks. Girl, You Need a Change of Mind.
Girl, you need a change of mind.
1972. Eddie Kendricks' solo career looks, on paper, like it's stalling. 2 years of singles missing the top 40, but buried on his second album, People. Hold On is an 8-minute track called Girl, You Need a Change of Mind, extended, driving, built on a groove that pulses differently from anything else Motown is releasing that year. Radio won't touch the full-length version. On the soul chart, it peaks at a modest Severely. Number 13. But downtown, in a private Manhattan loft run by a DJ named David Mancuso, something else is happening. Dancers are discovering that 8-minute record and losing themselves in it completely. Girl, You Need a Change of Mind becomes one of the foundational tracks of the underground dance scene that will, within a couple of years, get a name: disco. In 1972, before disco exists as a cultural concept, Eddie Kendricks is already laying its groundwork. largely without his own label noticing or caring.
Girl, you need a change of mind.
Here is a man Motown wasn't properly promoting, whose former group had just released a record built to humble him, and his musical instincts were already years ahead of an entire industry that had stopped paying close attention to him. The record that would help invent disco was sitting inside a Motown album the label barely pushed, at the exact moment its own executives had written Eddie Kendricks off as a fading former temptation. He was standing at the edge of something enormous with almost no one behind him. The industry would catch up within 2 years. He wouldn't get the credit for starting it. What he'd get next, instead, was proof. Undeniable, chart-topping proof that he'd been right about his own instincts all along. Number 4. Eddie Kendricks, Keep On Truckin'. November 10th, 1973. Keep On Truckin' by Eddie Kendricks hits number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It's not just a hit. No other member of the Temptations, across any era of the group's 60-year history, would ever match that solo peak on the pop chart. The man Motown had let walk out of its flagship group, the man whose former bandmates released a diss track about him, becomes the single most commercially successful solo voice to ever come out of that lineup. Boogie Down follows in 1974, reaching number 2 pop and number 1 R&B. Another million seller, another year at the very top. Produced by Frank Wilson, built on that unmistakable clavinet groove, riding entirely on the falsetto Berry Gordy's own hit machine had spent years quietly sidelining. Think about what those numbers actually mean, stacked against everything that came before them. Denied since 1965, overruled by a chart wager, forced to watch a friend get fired for asking honest questions, handed a diss track while he struggled, and 2 years after finally breaking free of all of it, Eddie Kendricks delivers the biggest pop hit any Temptation, past or future, would ever have on his own. Keep On Truckin' wasn't just a hit record. It was a verdict, delivered in the only language Berry Gordy ever fully respected. Chart positions, sales figures, numbers that don't lie. Eddie Kendricks had just proven, empirically, that everything he'd argued for since 1965 was worth listening to. And it still wasn't enough to change how the label treated him the next time it needed his voice for something he didn't want to sing. Number 3. Eddie Kendricks, Shoeshine Boy.
Shoeshine Boy.
1974. Producer Frank Wilson brings Kendricks a song called Shoeshine Boy, written by Linda Allen and Harry Booker, a man who genuinely worked the trade himself. Kendricks doesn't want it. He isn't alone. A senior Motown executive hears the demo and wants it shelved entirely, worried the lyric could read as demeaning to black listeners. For a moment, it looks like the song might die in the same vault that swallowed a dozen other Motown rejects. Then Berry Gordy overrules everyone in the room. He doesn't hear a stereotype. He hears his own childhood, shining shoes outside Hudson's department store in Detroit as a boy, chased off the block by shopkeepers who didn't want him there, and insists a shoeshine boy could be anybody. Doesn't have to be black. Doesn't have to be anything but a kid earning an honest dollar. He believes in the song's commercial potential, and that belief is the only vote that counts inside his own company. Frank Wilson works to convince a still reluctant Kendricks the record has real potential. Kendricks sings it.
So
Released January 1975, Shoeshine Boy goes to #1 R&B, his third and final chart topper, his last real crossover hit before his solo career begins to fade. The song he didn't want to sing becomes, by the cold measure of the charts, one of the most successful recordings of his life. Eddie Kendricks fought the sound of the Temptations for 4 years and lost. He fought for creative independence and won it, on his own terms, with Keep On Truckin'. And then Motown reached into his solo career anyway and overruled him one more time, not with a chart wager this time, but with the label founder's own personal conviction, worn like an unanswerable trump card. He sang it. It hit #1. And it still cost him something no chart position could ever pay back. Number 2, Eddie Kendricks, He's a Friend. 1976, Kendricks releases He's a Friend, its album cover showing two men's hands clasped together. Berry Gordy reads it as carrying overtones he considers wrong for Motown's image and tries to have it changed. This time, after everything, Kendricks fights back and wins. The cover stays. But the album that follows gets a fraction of the promotional push his earlier records received, and Gordy, according to accounts from people close to Kendricks at the time, tells him plainly that his career would go a lot further if he'd just be like Diana and do what he's told. Sit with that sentence. Not, the song didn't test well. Not, the timing was wrong. A direct message, artist to artist, that obedience was the actual price of Motown's continued support. After a #1 pop hit, after multiple platinum records, after Kendricks had proven with real commercial results that his instincts were worth investing in, the most powerful man in black music tells him the way forward is silence and compliance. Full stop. Eddie Kendricks had been at Motown since 1961. He'd arranged the group's vocals, styled its wardrobe, held it together through years of internal war, watched a friend get fired for asking about money, walked out of a nightclub rather than keep swallowing it, and delivered the label more commercial proof of his own judgment than almost anyone on the roster. The answer was still the same 4 words it had always been. Be like Diana. What happens when he finally tries to leave for good is the ugliest chapter in this entire story.
Intimate friend.
#1, Eddie Kendricks, Intimate Friends.
To share in love.
After 17 years with Motown, Eddie Kendricks tells Berry Gordy he wants out. Motown refuses to let him go. According to former Temptations road manager Tony Turner's book, Deliver Us from Temptation, when Kendricks pushed to have his contract released, the company's response escalated to the point of having him seen by psychiatrists. His years-long insistence on creative and financial control reframed, in that account, as something closer to instability than conviction. Turner writes that Kendricks eventually signed the release papers Motown demanded, though he'd never fully explain, even to people close to him, exactly what happened in that room. The price of that release was total. Kendricks had to relinquish all future royalties, not just on new work, but on every record he'd ever made for the label. Keep On Truckin', Boogie Down, Shoeshine Boy. 17 years of hits, signed away in exchange for the simple right to walk out the door. He moved to Arista, then Atlantic, chain-smoking through diminishing returns, as the falsetto that built his career slowly eroded above him. In 1991, lung cancer took one of his lungs on the operating table. He kept touring anyway, through Europe and Japan that summer, because performing was the only thing left that was still fully his. Before the cancer came back and killed him, he did one more thing almost nobody expected. He sued Motown Records, claiming the company still owed him royalties even after everything he'd already signed away in 1978. He died before the case was ever settled. Eddie Kendricks died on October 5, 1992, at 52 years old, without health insurance. The co-founder of one of the most successful vocal groups in American history, unable to afford his own final care. Soul singer Bobby Womack organized 2 benefit concerts just to help cover his family's costs. The man whose voice built an empire couldn't afford to leave it, and when he finally paid the price to walk away, the company he'd helped build still made sure the door cost him everything he'd earned on the way out. Every record you've heard tonight is just a groove cut into wax, spinning long after the arguments that shaped it stopped mattering to anyone but the people who lived them. Eddie Kendricks' voice never once sounds like a man being controlled. It sounds like a man doing the job better than the job deserved, every single time, whether the song was his idea or not. That's the whole secret hiding under this story. The performance you loved the most was rarely the one that was freely given. Comment below, which one of these 10 moments hit you the hardest? Subscribe.
Shoeshine Boy.
Because we are not done opening doors in this house. There are more voices in here we haven't uncovered yet. The music never lies, even when the industry does.
You need a change of mind.